Kia ora koutou. My name is Vicky Hargraves and I lead the early childhood content of the Education Hub's work. Nina Hood, who usually introduces our webinars, she's off on her parental leave, so I'm going to do the job of introducing the webinar tonight and just giving you the brief information about what we're doing tonight. So thank you for joining us. As you may know, the Education Hub is an organisation aimed at bridging the gap between research and practice for teachers. So we put lots of information online and run these webinars. So if you haven't already done so, make sure you do go online and have a look at our library of resources. And there are lots of resources on infant and toddler pedagogies. So tonight the webinar is going to run for 45 or 50 minutes. And partway through the webinar, we're going to offer you the opportunity to ask your own questions. So to do that, you need to use the chat function. So if you see the chat function at the bottom of your screen, you just click on that and start typing. I will be monitoring the questions and trying to feed them through to our speakers tonight as I can. We're also going to be recording the webinar, and the webinar recording will be available on our website in the next couple of days. So if you really enjoy it, you can share it with others. Okay, let me start then by introducing our speakers tonight. We have Professor Carmen Dalli. She's the Professor of Early Childhood Studies in the School of Education at Victoria University of Wellington. And she has an international reputation for her research on early childhood policy and pedagogy with under threes, very focused on infant and toddler education and care. And then we have Dr Karyn Aspden. She is a lecturer and a program coordinator of the graduate diploma at Massey University in the School of Education. And her research focuses on the social and emotional competence of infants and toddlers. Well, many other things as well, I'm sure, but certainly a strong focus on infant and toddler pedagogies from both of our experts tonight. So welcome, Carmen. Welcome, Karyn.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
It's lovely to be invited. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about infant and toddler pedagogies and what it means to have a specialist pedagogy for this age group. So I'm going to start by asking you, Carmen, why do infants and toddlers require a specialist practice?
Right. Well, because infants and toddlers, like older children, are human beings, but they have unique characteristics, and that requires specialist knowledge and unique knowledge. And I think this was really nicely put in the original Tefariki, which I'm sure people will remember on page 22. This was a statement I often quoted with my students. And it said that working with infants and toddlers is neither a scaled down 3 or 4-year-old program, nor a babysitting arrangement. And that statement really referred to the specialist nature of infant and toddler work. And now we have a lot of new knowledge from science domains that really highlight just how unique this age group is. It highlights both the competencies of infants and toddlers as well as their vulnerabilities. So for example, for many years, we didn't give infants and toddlers credit for all the things that they could do. And now we know so much more about what they can do. We know, for example, that they can, from the time they're in utero, before they are born, they are sensitive to sounds, to noise, to rhythms. And in fact, experiments with music, playing the same music to a baby when they haven't been born, and then playing it again when they're born, they respond to that with familiarity. So we know that they're sensitive to vocal tones. We know that they attune to faces that are dynamic much more. They give more attention to them than to faces that are static, expressionless faces. We know that by 5 months, for example, they have really understood that their vocalizations can be very effective in drawing attention to themselves and engaging people with them. Turn-taking studies, they've shown us that actually babies can predict what's going to happen next by the way that they synchronize what they do with what they expect the adult to be able to do. And of course, everyone who's done any psychology study will remember the still face experiment. When a baby is first of all interacting with someone in an animated way, and the adult then suddenly stops their responsiveness and goes deadpan, and it really distresses the baby. So that tells us that babies care about people being responsive to them. I could give you lots more examples. I mean, we know that they attune to peers differently than to adults. So they will, with their body, show that they are understanding what peers are feeling, that if they're crying, they show that they're distressed. So we know a lot more about the competencies of babies now. And we also know, as I mentioned before, a lot more about their vulnerabilities. We know that the pathways in the brain are influenced strongly by how we relate to infants and toddlers in their first 1,000 days of life. And that what we do in those first 1,000 days lays the foundation for what comes next. I don't know whether you want to add something to that, Karyn.
Thanks. Yeah, I do just want to affirm, I think, one of the reasons that we so strongly advocate for specialised practice for infants and toddlers is for the strength that we can bring to the infant and toddler experience, and also the protection because of the increased vulnerabilities that we have with this age group. We know we have to confront the truth that poor practice when working with infants and toddlers is not just neutral. It doesn't just not have an impact, it actually brings about risks for infants and toddlers. Right. There is the potential for harm. So because of that, our professional integrity tells us that we must be most skillful, most knowledgeable and wise in our practice so that we mitigate the risk of poor practice, so that we actually create the environments and the experiences and create the opportunities for infants and toddlers to thrive and to flourish, and rather than expose them to the risk of poor practice in which we know children, very young children can begin to disengage, disconnect, and actually know that the very shaping of brain architecture is impacted by exposure to poor practice. So it's not neutral. We take a very passionate stance on this because of our deep care for our infants and toddlers, the strength we know that quality provision can give, and the risk we know that poor quality also counts for our youngest tamariki.
Mm.
So, thank you, Karyn. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, it just defines for us that specialised knowledge is critical. There is much complexity to our work with infants and toddlers, our pedagogical understanding, the skills that we bring, and so we need to bring that specialised knowledge in order for children to thrive.
Mm.
Thank you, Karyn. I was going to add, there's been quite a bit of research, hasn't there, around children's vulnerabilities, I suppose, and the things that they need and what can happen if they don't receive those that specialised practice. So, Carmen, could you talk us through a little bit? What are the key ideas from that research?
Yes, well, one of the big insights we have from neurobiological research is the importance of having calm environments for infants and toddlers, particularly infants. Because if it's not a calm environment, if it's an environment that, for example, is always noisy, there's yelling, there's children who are stressed because they're not getting the attention. If that is a continuous state of affairs, that stress doesn't go away. It becomes what's called toxic stress. So toxic stress is when children have stress that they cannot control, and also they haven't got access to someone who can help them mitigate that stress, regulate themselves down from being stressful. And so if that state of stress continues, then it becomes toxic stress, and that closes up the brain for learning. So that's a really important lesson from our new knowledge, neurobiological, neuroscientific knowledge about infants and toddlers. And the other very important lesson that I think is important that we all bear in mind is that what this neurobiological research is doing is it's really validating providing us with the neurobiological evidence that validates what child development research, you know, from the 50s even, has long said. In other words, that children need to develop responsive relationships, what's called attachment relationships. I think we've all heard of that, you know, Bowlby's studies and Mary Ainsworth's studies with infants, with their parents in multiple cultural settings. And that showed how children go to the familiar person, often the mother in the early experiments, but now also in other settings. They seek that familiar person for their security. So that's been around for a long time, but we didn't really understand the mechanism of how that worked. We thought it was just a social thing, but what neurobiological research has done is it has shown us that there is also a biological component to these social behaviors. So there's also, of course, Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory that emphasizes the importance of sensitive, responsive caregiving for the well-being of a child, for the sense of identity. So Erikson is known as the identity theorist. So these ideas have been around in child development knowledge. But now, not only have we got the child development knowledge, we also have the neuroscientific knowledge. And together they come to, you know, they form one picture, which tells us that children need responsive interactions with adults who are knowledgeable about them. They're sensitive to their cues and wanting to understand them as people and giving them the space to be people who are being read by the adults with them. Yeah. So because this and it's a different sort of when you're a kayako, when you're a trained teacher, it's a different sort of relationship that you have to have with babies. You know, then if they were your own, right? Okay.
One of the topics that Carmen and I had a wonderful conversation with in preparing for this was exploring the identity of infant and toddler kayako and what that means, what it means with all the neuroscience, neurobiological research that we're doing. It affirms again the critical importance of the role of the infant and toddler kayako and how that's positioned. And one of the conversations we were having, and this might be of interest to some of you, is around reframing this not as an act of mothering. Traditionally, younger the children we've worked with, the line between the roles of mothering and teaching have become really blurred. And that's actually compounded by some of the research, such as attachment research, which typically focuses on the mother relationship. And yet we're drawing on that to inform our practice as infants and toddlers. But with infants and toddlers, but we know, and we want to position really clearly that it is not an act of mothering, but an act of professional care. It's driven by an ethic of care and professional understanding of the critical importance of relationships, that these relationships don't replace the parental relationship, but they sit alongside in rich and deep and meaningful ways. They provide that security for the infant or toddler while they're in your care and provide that space from which the infant and toddler then feel secure enough to begin to explore and engage and connect with the wider world. But very different to the act of mothering, but rather an act of professional engagement and deeply embedded care. And I think it's really important that we, as we look at the professionalism of our sector and we continue our conversations about what it means to be a kayako and what we bring to the role, it's really important to validate those of us who work with our youngest kayako, the deep complexity of our work, the rich pedagogical understandings that underpin the work, and the fact that it comes from a strong tradition of research and that really prioritises the work that we do and its critical importance.
I can pick up on one thing that you mentioned, you know, we're there as professionals. So often when I'm talking about this topic with my students, I say to them, you know, no, it's not what a mother would do. Sure, we want every child to be loved as if they were being loved by a mother. But in our role as professional teachers, it may be that we encounter children who don't automatically draw us in. A mother automatically loves their child most of the time, and there are exceptions. But when you are a professional teacher at higher core, there may be children to whom you're not immediately drawn. There may be children who, in fact, you might actually put you off. I mean, I think we've all experienced this. I certainly, have many years of teaching experience behind me. But there are children who draw you in, whom you want automatically to be with, and yet others that are not so much. So what do? A true professional will offer the best they can offer to every child, irrespective of whether they find the child attractive or not. And hence, this is not an act of mothering. This comes from a different place. It comes from a place of, it's an ethical imperative of being a professional, rather than, because they're lovely and I love them. And, it's good to have people who love children. And of course, we would hope every hierarchy who works with children loves children, but you can't draw on love all the time. You need also that professional commitment.
Absolutely. Thank you. Can I just clarify for our audience in Australia that kayako is the Māori word for teacher. So that's the word that Carmen's using there. Okay, thank you. I think you're right. That's a really important distinction that we need to make, and as you said, Karen, for professionalising this really important and specialist work that infant and toddler teachers are doing. Karen, could you talk to us a little bit then about what high quality infant and toddler practices would look like?
I can, in the brief parameters, because I could talk for a very long time about it. I will do my very best to give the quick précis of some of what we think is really, really important. And we're very fortunate now to be in a position where there are a number of us researching in this space. There's some very, very thoughtful research going on in New Zealand and abroad that's really informing us now that we can draw from to really begin to articulate what quality practice looks like through a cultural lens, through sociological lenses. And it's very powerful to be sitting now and starting to see this research evidence starting to come together to inform our practice. So there's a couple of key messages I think that we really need to begin with, which came out of Carmen's literature work that they did a number of years ago now that still stands so strongly. Also came out of the teaching practices work that I've been involved in recently, the Infant and Toddler Project. Beginning with the power of the knowledgeable adult. So the informed kayako who brings their wisdom and their knowledge of infant and toddler pedagogy into a low stress environment. So a rich, responsive, relationship-based environment in which children are truly cared for in ways that make them feel safe, protected, secure. And then beyond that, within a policy infrastructure that puts the resourcing in place to actually allow this to happen, that allows for quality staffing, that allows for ratios, that allows for rich environments, safe environments, well-resourced spaces. We know these things are critical. We know that some of it rests with the actions of the teacher, very much. That day-to-day interaction is so much of where the quality interaction lies. But those features are so much shaped by the wider policy implications, by the resourcing, by the structures that are put in place to enable that. And we know that very much poor quality can be really countered when there are constraints put in place to teachers actually being able to foster the deep, ongoing, abiding, caring relationships that we know are so critical. So we really are asking for those things to come together and to see them as how they intersect in really, really critical ways. And we know that we can't go past that iron triangle of quality that has so often been talked about in early childhood, where we need to consider what ratios look like, we need to consider the implications of group size, and we need to consider the qualifications of kayako who work with our youngest children. And we know that we've had a history in New Zealand of often not putting our most qualified or skillful teachers with our youngest. And we take the position where we counter that, where we talk about we need to make really intentional decisions around the staffing with our youngest infants and toddlers to make sure that they really do receive quality care from teachers who are informed, skillful, and deeply embedded in that relational pedagogy. So that's that very broad and outward things. But we wanted to ask the question too, what does it look like or feel like for infants and toddlers? And I think that's a really powerful question. Something that has really struck me in my thinking is for an infant or toddler, the capacity for time, that an hour doesn't feel the same maybe to us as adults as it might to an infant or a toddler. Their lived experience, they don't have the markers for time. They can't look at a watch and think, I've just got 10 more minutes to go until this changes. They are living in that moment, in every moment. And so that every moment has to be so thoughtful and careful and intentional in the mahi, in the work that we are doing. So we want to, for a child, that means an environment where their whānau their family has a deep place in that service, where there are so close relationships, where there is ongoing communication, where whānau talk with teachers and teachers use that knowledge to help them best support the child. We know it's best when children are in an environment that is led by a relationship-based pedagogy, where that is the driver, where relationships are the key defining priority in that space. And relationships are seen to open the door to support learning and social emotional competence. It's in the context of those deep relationships where the child is truly known, where there are sensitive and responsive caregiving that is so attuned to the child, to their small cues, that the child is able to feel that sense of complete trust, that they will be seen, they'll be heard, that they will be cared for by adults who are completely present to them in that moment, that they can trust that their needs will be met, and that they can then increasingly begin to cope with the challenge of increasing space and increasing opportunity, because they know they have that security, that constant presence of a trusted adult. And for us, that means a really stable staff is critical. Having staff that having teachers who are there throughout the day, that children know and rely on, and that they are communicated around the role of the kaiko through the day. So, for example, when teachers do need to go on leave, that they, or not on leave, but like go for lunch or whatever, there's communication to infants and toddlers around, I'll be back, this is who's here, all those things that really ensure that continuity of ongoing relationship and security that provides the platform for all else that happens during the day. Carmen, have you got some other thoughts you want?
Well, I was just thinking as you were talking, we probably need to mention the key teacher system here. And I know it can be quite a controversial thing to talk about, because often people misunderstand what a key teacher or primary caregiver system is. And sort of, often people think that it's about a one-on-one exclusive relationship between an adult and a teacher. But in fact, when you have a key teacher system, what it is just an organizational mechanism to ensure that no child is lost, right? So we talk about, and we can write about it. So what does it mean? It means that a child has one main teacher who welcomes them, who knows them well, but it always requires that there's a secondary and third or fourth backup. So, and that means that you need to work together as a team in order that you understand that what you're each doing by being key teachers for a group of children is you are ensuring that no one gets lost. So in order to do that, you have to organize yourself as a team. But the team needs to understand that we're all in this together, because a key teaching system doesn't work if you haven't got the whole team on board and the leadership of the center on board, okay? Another thing that, sorry, you were going to...
I was just going to say, we also acknowledge that there are cultural ways of viewing key caregiving.
Yes.
For example, whānau-based models, which have exactly the same purpose. They have a different cultural lens, and equally powerful because the same purpose is abiding in them, that no child is lost. No child is not cared for within that collective space. Every child is valued, their mana is enhanced, they are deeply cared for. So we know that there are other cultural lenses, and we want to acknowledge and honour those tonight, other ways of looking at key teaching, but the purpose and the principles remain the same around ensuring that every child receives consistent, trusting care Yeah, thanks, Carmen.
That's right. And they are known. And so the child feels known, whether it's not just by one person, but by the team. I really, thank you. I think we really need to emphasize this because there are so many misconceptions about this, and I've been talking even with my Maori colleagues, and they say, well, it's true, we have a collective approach to looking after children. However, we also acknowledge, for example, that a child traditionally might have been, for example, breastfed by more than one woman in a whānau. Nonetheless, they would attune to the fact that a child might have a preferred breast. And in that case, the child would go to that preferred breast. So it's not as if this is, when you attune to a child, you read the child and their cues, and therefore you respond. So that's what we're talking about here, an organizational mechanism to ensure no child is lost, because each child needs that presence, that sense of being known. And while we're on this topic, I also want to mention the importance of language, because children need to be in language-rich environments, right? And often I have students who may not have been ever in a situation with babies, and they'll say, oh, I don't know how to talk to babies. So one of the things that I actually try and get them started with is to say, okay, if you don't know what to say, and this is something I actually read in a thesis I had marked I had marked once, where there was a speech language therapist who was trying to work with a group of teachers and getting them to be more talkative with infants and toddlers. And she said, she gave them this mnemonic, something to remember. If you don't know what to say something about you, say something about me, say something about what we can see. So you, me, see. How easy is it to remember that? And it can get you started. And language is the most important tool that a teacher has at any level of education. But with babies, when they're just opening up to the world, and language is so important in terms of creating our frames of reference, the way we see the world. So language-rich environment. It doesn't mean that you don't ever stop talking, because calm is also important, but it means that you are always thinking, how can I give expression to what I'm seeing, what the child might be feeling, so that they learn to manage the world around them.
One of the strategies I'm often talking to my student teachers about is, particularly those who've most experience has been with older children, is that they tend to use questioning as one of their primary tools, asking lots of questions to engage learners. And then they're working with infants and toddlers and wondering sort of how to reorient. And one of the great ways to do that is it's got different names, but it's around narrating or commentating, sportscasting. It's got different terms, but it's essentially storying life for the child through language while you're with the child, telling the story, narrating, making those comments as you go that provide that lovely, rich language context. So sometimes if you're wondering how to make that shift, it's around, okay, not so many questions, but how can I start to narrate? And what's the power of the story I can tell while I'm with the child? And so in those lovely caregiving moments, seeing those caregiving moments, rich language times and rich times of intimacy between you and that child in that one-on-one moment while you're sharing, whether it be nappy changing, a kai time or sleep time. They're lovely intimate moments where that language, that care can really be expressed so meaningfully. Yeah.
Yes, I agree, Karen. Sorry, Carmen. I was just going to say I agree that talking through what you're doing, but also talking through what you perceive, your cues that you're picking up from the child, but giving language to those. These are some of the comments coming through as well.
Yeah, I just wanted, I'm just thinking about what we've been saying, and we focus a lot on the importance of relationships, and we've really talked a lot about relationships within people, but I think it's really important to also talk about relationships with things. In our curriculum, Tefariki, we have important responsive relationship with people, places, and things. And I think that brings us to the importance of the physical environment. And I think we mustn't forget that, you know, because we focus so much on people, but the environment is another participant in the relationships that children have. And I think the key point to remember about environments is that they need to be planned with the children's needs in mind. And we said earlier that infants and toddlers have particular characteristics, and that some of that has to do with their physical size, with their abilities to move or not move. So we need to be thinking in terms of, what do we know about learning? We know about children's learning. We know that they learn by being active. So what does that mean? It means that the environment needs to provide opportunities for activities, for them to be active. We know that they need to interact with others, hence kayak or teachers need to interact with them. We know that they learn through using language. So let's give them, let's say, the chance to engage with us and to accept what they give us, their vocalizations, as part of the conversation. And in the physical environment, we know they learn by exploring and investigating. Let's give them access to the real world. Let's create physical environments where they can play with freedom to choose what they do, which means things like accessibility of materials, not things up on shelves, but within reach. We know, for example, with babies, from research, we know that they actually are sensitive to the appearance and of their environment and to the organization of their environments. And so they orient themselves by, for example, windows. They know, windows, that's where mom goes by when she leaves. Even infants who can't articulate, they'll know, they'll see their mother, they'll look at the window going by. So then we need to think about what physical landmarks can we provide, what different spaces for them to be able to go into a private space and be quiet if the environment is getting too much for them. So this applies a lot when they can crawl. As we get to movement, they sit up, then they crawl, then they walk. Toddlers, they're always carrying things to and fro. They're figuring out, how to make things work and how things work. So we need to be thinking in terms of how we lay out this space so that it's safe, so that it's challenging at the same time, and that it's predictable. And that's one of the RIE principles, the resources for infants and toddlers. I've seen some of the comments in the chat. That's one of the principles as well for the environment: safe, challenging, and predictable. And we have lots of people who have written about environment now for infants and toddlers. Like Anita Olds, who talks about the importance of an environment that allows for movement, for comfort, not just of the child, but also of the adult. Because if you're comfortable in an environment as an adult, you're more likely to stop and chat. You're more likely to feel, I can sit down and sing a lullaby. I can sit down and read a book. So comfort is important. Space that enable children to feel confident. They can reach things. I mentioned that before, the access. And also spaces where they have a sense of control. So some of my colleagues, I don't know if you're familiar with the article that Lisa Tereni and Perman once wrote. It's called A Yes Environment, Creating a Yes Environment. I talk to my students about, yes, let's make it an environment where, yes, I can do this. Children can feel, yes, I can do this, because things are accessible. I think it's really important to put that physicality of the environment back into the equation of relationships, because it's there in our curriculum, but we tend to sometimes not talk as much about it as I think it needs to be.
Thank you, Carmen. Well, we've got lots of questions coming in through the chat, and if anybody, I did intend to invite you to send your questions, but there's lots we can get started on. Thank you so much for what you've talked through so far, and there's been a lot of nodding, a lot of people saying they're nodding all the time as they're listening to you speak, so a lot of your messages are really resonating with us. Just talking a bit more about the physical environment, Carmen, what is your sort of feeling about group size, and is there a way that sort of room layout can support optimal group sizes for infants?
Well, look, this is a really tricky question. And actually, not so long ago, I wrote a paper with Anne Pearman about this because it was engaging our brain. And in fact, even in the strategic plan, we had to hold back on saying exactly the group size we needed. Why? Because group size interacts with other factors, like the design of the space. So what is a group, right? What is a group? And it can change if they shift. So I think we need to be thinking about groups in terms of the space and how it's divided up into areas that people can be. But yes, it ought to, what I need to say is not big groups, because big groups get confusing, right? So that's as much as I'm wanting to say at the moment about group size, because the jury is out in terms of how we're going to provide guidance where the guidance on group interacts well with space. I perhaps need a small comment I will add is Anne Pearman's PhD thesis has been very good on this topic, because she showed how you need to have a big enough space that enables different types of spaces to be available, so that you have all possibilities for small groups and bigger sizes. So it's the most flexible, big, but with big space which is complex. So not an open space, not a big open space, but a space which has complexity in it. In other words, different sizes of spaces where you can have different group arrangements. I would, if anyone's interested in that, the thesis is at Victoria University, and the final chapter is really good about the interaction between those two things. I'm hoping she's going to write papers from it.
We can provide a link to that maybe after the webinar, can we, Carmen?
Thank you.
Okay, just going back to the very first part of the discussion tonight, and we were talking about the relational pedagogies and the fact that we're not mothering, but we have a slightly more professional, slightly different approach to providing those responsive relationships. Some people were asking where you think that love sits within that, within your thinking there, and a more specific question, I suppose, is, would it be inappropriate to kiss a child? I don't know who wants to take this question, Karen or Carmen.
I don't mind having a start, and then Carmen might to come in. It's an interesting question, because it is about that. I think it does often come down to that divide between mothering type care and the professional identity of a kaiako. But in saying that, whenever we're advocating for that professional identity, we're in no way minimising the depth of care or relationship that we believe that needs to be in place. We're just positioning it differently. It should still feel like a deep and abiding connection. It should feel like a bond and a care, and it should feel like close and intimate, all of those factors. Now, whether that's labelled as love, but love is a very complex word. So it needs unpacking. It's the sort of thing that I think teams really need to talk about, their conception of what it means to care in their space and how that's defined, how it's named. But I think no matter the name we give to it, we understand what we mean and what we want children to feel in that moment. We want them to feel that deep sense of belonging. We want them to feel secure. We want them to feel a sense of trust that their needs will be met. But I think we have to take care with the words we use, because of the complexity and the attributions we give to some of those words, and how that positions us in our role. And we know, for example, when we start, we have to have a great sensitivity to still honouring the role of the whānau. And sometimes there can be risk where whānau feel that teachers may cut across their relationships, and that's never our intention. Our relationship work is designed to continue to support the attachment relationships that happen at home, never to cut across them, but only to affirm them and uphold them. So we want to make sure that positioning is really clear, so that we work together in ways that feel safe for all in that triadic relationship. Carmen, did you want to pull some more too?
I think I agree totally with what you have said. Yes, a child needs to feel loved. But I think, so that's the baseline. A child needs to feel loved. But that's the child's perspective. From an adult perspective, what we need to ask ourselves is, who am I doing this for?
Yeah.
Who am I expressing? If the answer is not the child, if the answer is because I enjoy it or because I need this, then that's not professional. Mm-hmm. Okay? So the important thing is, and this is another, I have a list of things. Sometimes I have these, because I teach first-year students coming into teacher education, I find it helpful sometimes to give them little sort of links to jog their memory. And one of them is one I learned in a center. I was working with Child Space, with a group of people in Wellington on a Center of Innovation project. And they had this wonderful, I learned as much from them as I hope they learned something from me. When we were talking, they were about their practice. They said, we ask ourselves, who am I doing this for? And if the answer is not the child, then I have to think again. So I think that's quite a good thing to bear in mind. And so when you have a question in your mind, should I be doing this? It's good to say to yourself, who am I doing this for? And I think there you have your answer, and the professional answer. So the professional answer may be that you put on the performance that we know of love, what we would normally see as the outside manifestation of love, because children need to feel that. What we need to do as adults is bring an ethical imperative to our work that says, we are the one caring for. This child is being cared for by me. So there's a perspective on ethics called the ethic of care perspective. And that is what we need to bring into our expression of love as a professional expression, rather than something that is going to feed me as a person. I'm not doing this for me. I am doing this because I know that without this child might be in danger of being damaged. Like Karen said before, it's a specialist job because what we do matters. And what we don't do also matters. What we do not do can be damaging. So if the children need to feel loved, we need to have the behaviors that engender a sense of being loved in the child. So that means being all of the things that we've discussed.
Because
I hope that helps.
With infants and toddlers, lays down the emotional journey of the child's future life as well. We set foundations for future relationships, and we begin to set the child's understanding of emotion, both positive and challenging emotions. So much of the work we do with infants and toddlers is around supporting, particularly for toddlers, if you think about their emotional journey through a day, is providing that stable, supportive, helping them to manage emotion through the day. And we do that even with the positive emotions. So if we understand it from that professional perspective, it's not about that mutual giving and taking as much as it is being present and understanding the significance of the work that we're doing. Yeah.
Thank you. We've talked quite a bit. There were questions coming through about the importance of using language with young children, and I think you've talked really well to that topic. But what about sort of your pedagogies for play, especially for very young infants? What sort of pedagogy of play would you recommend?
Who's going to take this one first?
Yes.
All right, I'll kick us off, Karen, and you can. I think with infants, and once they start sitting, what is one really valuable thing is the treasure baskets, the sensory joy and exploration of different textures and what things can do, and children can spend hours, literally, with all the stuff that we can do. And I mean, you could there's lots written about this, at what heuristic play it used to be called, and now we call them treasure baskets. But I think with infants, that's what it is. It's figuring out how things work. Let me just, throw that one in. Karen.
The other thing I might just add to that, and it's something I've been thinking about today, was in another context, was so often as kayaku, and even with our planning, we're thinking about next steps. How do we encourage and foster next steps? But for infants and toddlers, what can be equally important is the opportunity to remain in that moment, to practice and rehearse and repeat, and to over and over again. And sometimes in infants and toddlers, we might regularly change the environment, but in fact, having that same environment and the chance to keep playing and keep re-engaging with that play is really, really important. And that changes in our infants and toddler places should be much slower, much often more subtle than we might do in older children's spaces, because we just know the importance of not always looking to the next step. We are unhurried, we are allowing those moments of continual revisiting, and until children develop that sense of mastery, even as they get multiple opportunities to engage with the same play resources and to explore them in increasingly complex ways. Yeah.
And that's so intentional as well, Karen. That is an intentional practice to slow down, to not change it straight away, and to give the children that time. Okay, we normally finish around now, but I wonder if I could ask you one more question. We've just had so much engagement tonight. Would you be willing to answer one more question?
Yeah.
Thank you. So we just been, somebody said on the comment that it's, as if a kayaku needs 5 arms in relation to this idea that, there's this one teacher and there may be a ratio of 1 to 5, there may be 5 infants. And so it's probably not even 5 arms, it's also 5 heads, in 5 sets of eyes, for each child. Where teachers are feeling really challenged by the ratios that they're working within, what would your recommendations be for where they should really spend their energy, and which aspects of infant and toddler care would be the most important things to be getting right, given that they feel stretched? A tricky question, I know.
Yes, can I start, if I can say one thing, to make the most of the moments that you do get with them, right? In other words, there are things, and to resist being put on production lines for doing things like nappy changes. That, I think if there's one thing that you can try and change is to resist that, and to insist that you have at least the time when you're changing a nappy is a time of one-to-one interaction. That's on what can you do right now. But I think above that, we need to become advocates, right? So, okay, I know I'm running the risk now of saying, well, that's not going to help me tomorrow, but it will help you if you join up with people of a like mind to put pressure to change policies, right? I am very aware that we continue to have policies for under 3-year-olds being knocked back all the time. We've had in New Zealand since the 90s, we have argued about the need for better ratios for under 2s, okay? It's back in the strategic plan, but it's long in the coming. It's long term rather than now. So I think we need to stop thinking only about what we're doing right now and join forces with like-minded people and advocate. We need to rekindle the spirit of advocacy and fight, I suppose, to change policies, because things only change when people speak up. I'd like that to be one of the messages from today.
Thank you. Anything you'd like to add, Karen, or shall we?
It's really hard to follow that, because I can only say that I just completely agree, and I think that that advocacy voice is absolutely critical. But I also think what I might just add in closing is that it is for this reason that we advocate for the specialised infant toddler practitioner. practitioner who has the wisdom, that teaching wisdom in those moments to be able to make those very complex decisions. That's why we believe in having practitioners who've taken a specialisation, who've read about infant and toddler practice, who have made it their commitment to really understand pedagogical ways of working with infants and toddlers that enhance quality, so that in those moments they can bring that wisdom to bear in trying to, in their best way to navigate those moments. And it is an art. It really is an art in those moments, and you find those creative spaces and those ways of meeting children's needs in complex and creative teaching ways. And for that, we just affirm those who have put their investment, their time, their commitment into working with infants and toddlers and really strengthening their pedagogical ways of being. And yeah.
Thank you. Really wise words to finish with. Carmen, is there anything you'd like to add?
Oh, perhaps I could say in finishing off, be prepared, set up the environment, be prepared, and then be present to infants. I think that's the crucial thing. Be present.
Well, thank you. We've had a fabulous time listening to you tonight. Comments on the chat, everyone's found you really inspiring to listen to, and as I have. So thank you for all the wealth of expertise that you've offered us. If people are interested, there are some resources on the Education Hub's website around infant and toddler pedagogy, but also on the treasure baskets that Carmen mentioned, and language, using language with infants and toddlers. So I encourage you to go and look at those things. People are also asking about some of the research that you cited. And so what I will do in the next couple of days is I'll come to you, Karyn and Carmen, and just ask you for some references that I can pass on. So if you check our website in a couple of days, you'll see the video there and a list of some further reading ideas for those that are interested. Lots of thank yous rushing through on the chat now. It's just for me to say thank you so much for joining us and sharing this expertise and this really inspiring discussion tonight. So thank you, Karyn. Thank you, Carmen.
And thank you for having us.
Wonderful.
Yes, and good night, everyone. Kia ora,
Good night.
kia ora koutou. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou.